Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend some time with Malicroix by Henri Bosco. I realize I might not be pronouncing this in the correct French way, but Malicroix is what I'm going with for this chat. It was originally published in 1948 in French, and I read an English language translation by Joyce Zonana that was published in 2020. So Malicroix. Why I read this? This book was referenced, or rather this author was referenced in Gaston Bachelard's The Poetics of Space. And it turns out that the ideas in The Poetics of Space and as well as in this book are sort of related. And the author actually here gives some credit to acknowledgement to Bachelard as being an inspiration to him. So that was really interesting to me. I will link down to the chat for The Poetics of Space down below. It is one of the more popular of the book chats that I've done here on my channel. This book was also recommended to me by a viewer in a comment, actually, to, I think it was The Poetics of Space, letting me know that this edition, this English language edition, was now available. Back when I read The Poetics of Space originally, I tried to find some works by Henri Bosco in English and could not find any at that time. So I'm super glad we finally got a translation of this because it was a lot of fun to read. It's basically about the story of a young man who's 25 years old. His name is Marshall Megremut, and he is living a happy, stable life among his aunts and uncles who raised him. And his father was a Megremut, but his mother was a Malicroix. The Megremuts are a kind and gentle, sort of stable, prosperous, middle-class family. You know, they live in this family cluster of these well-tended fields and orchards, and they just live a very happy, well-ordered life. So eventually this young man, Marshall, receives news that his great-uncle, his mother's uncle, Malicroix, has died, and he is the only surviving member of that family, is his heir. All he really knew of this uncle was that he lived in a remote place in sort of this wild and solitary existence. And so even though he loves his family, the Megremuts, he nevertheless had a certain love of solitude as well, a secret love of solitude, and he felt a certain kinship with this sort of this wild, long-lost uncle. And there's a quote here that sort of illustrates that. It says here, "The gentle and patient Megremuts, my father's people, have over long years possessed the calm soul of the family into which I was born. It is to them that I owe a certain gentleness. Because of this, they loved me as one of theirs and have always believed that, regarding O Malicroix, that I thought exactly as they did. Whereas I loved him silently, and how happy I was to be among them all, alone in that love." So he harbors this sort of secret love for this wild sort of character from his other side of his family. So eventually the young man, Marshall, he receives this letter from a notary that he's inherited some land from this uncle, some marshland, with some livestock and a small house, and he's instructed that the property is very isolated, and he's given these specific instructions to meet on a certain date at a certain place, and he'll be taken to that property. Now, of course, the Megremuts are not happy about this, right? Because they are this stable, prosperous, well-ordered family. They don't like wild things that are out of control, out of the ordinary. And so they try to discourage him from going and try to encourage him to just sell the property sight unseen. But, you know, he has this sort of secret Malicroix blood in him as well, right? And so he wants to actually see the property. So he goes and he meets at the designated place and time. And he meets this silent, sort of mysterious, silent, older man who takes him on this journey. It's nighttime by the time he gets there. It's all very sort of mysterious. The old man doesn't say much. And so we, the reader, though, as we're experiencing this, we immediately get the sense that the character is moving from one reality into a different reality. So eventually he does make it to this house. It's in an island in the middle of the Rhone River. It's a small, simple house that's just basically this one room. And the older man who had met him at the designated place, it turns out, was the caretaker. His uncle has lived in this house alone for many, many years, with the exception of this caretaker to really be his only human contact. This house, though, is very sort of unique in the sense that we, the reader, really experiences this symbol of the house and this emotion of a house, of what a house is. And there's a quote here that sort of illustrates this as well. And the quote says, "A house, even one given to you by law, might very well not give itself. It is easy to appear as an intruder. A simpler, more straightforward house could not be imagined. But simple places are the hardest for us. We are never fully at home in them. We look them over too quickly to uncover the thought that may be secretly inscribed in the most ordinary object." Whereas if you're in this very simple house, this house is a sort of an entity, right? As he's entering into this house, this solitude, and because the house is so sparse, the objects in the house have this different meaning. And it says, the quote there says, that we normally, when we enter a place, we just glance around. We don't actually see what's there. And so in a house that's very sparse, we do see it more clearly, see that reality more clearly, I think is what he's trying to say there. So the caretaker, his name is Balandrin, he and his dog and young Marshall are the only inhabitants of this island. They are there alone. But eventually, the notary is supposed to meet them, but he is delayed for whatever reason. He has to come to this island by boat. So I think there was a storm that raged for a while, and he couldn't make it. But eventually, the notary does arrive there. He lets this young Marshall know that in order to inherit the property, he has to fulfill some conditions in order to receive this inheritance. And the main condition is he has to stay there on the island for 3 months. And then he has to complete another task that I won't really reveal here before he can inherit the property. So this character then is faced with the task of, should I stay or should I just go ahead and relinquish this and leave and give up the property? He ultimately does decide to stay on this isolated island in this very small house alone for this period of time. So that's basically the theme of the book here. Well, there's several different themes and multiple different layers, but one main theme is this solitude and how solitude can change our perception of reality. So there's just much more to this story than I can go into in this video. But the book is poetic and it's mythic. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but the way it's written, it feels really symbolic and dreamlike. And I got to really hand it to this English translator because it really comes across well, and I think she must have just done a fantastic job of transmitting this author's ideas from the original book into English, because the reader really does get immersed in this dreamlike sort of symbolic world of this island and this house. So the dog of the characters, the caretaker and young Marshall are really the main, characters that are human, but the dog of the caretaker also kind of becomes a character, but not just the dog, but the sense of solitude in the house is such that the house itself becomes a character, as does the fire in the fireplace, as does the island itself, as does the wind and the rain that sort of lashes the island periodically, the river especially. All in a sense, they're also characters as well, carrying this deep symbolic emotional weight throughout the book. There's a quote here that sort of illustrates this that I thought was pretty cool, and it says, "Objects have a friendship, and it may be that, like Balandrin, who's the caretaker, all these things had kept themselves apart. Once Balandrin's friendship came to me, everything in the house that loved Balandrin began to love me too, and I suddenly felt it. Through simple love, several humble forms of life emerged from nothingness, and their presence haunted me." This is like a candlestick, like the fire, the house itself. So these sort of objects have a sort of animation, have a sort of meaning that the average everyday person wouldn't necessarily see if you're just casually seeing the house. So, in the solitude of this location and this house, young Marshall really begins to experience a different reality. Not the physical reality, but like I said, this sort of symbolic, mythic reality. There's another quote here that I think is pretty cool, and it says, "Aside from the fire stirring feebly on its ashes, everything seemed caught in unearthly stillness, and yet it was alive. If only the way a thought, reduced solely to its presence, might live, unmoving, beyond the real. In the bareness of the room, my little lamp in hand, I was inside this simple thought, and I was listening." So a thought is a symbolic thing, right? It's not a physical reality, and that's what he's describing here. I just think that's so cool. So Marshall's here through the late fall. I think he goes in November. He's at the house through the winter, so there's constant storms, wind, rain, snow eventually. And this really contrasts, I think, with the stability of the Megromut family with their well-organized orchards and fields and their well-organized life. All the while, this river, rages around the island. The island actually splits the river. And, does the river in its sort of mysterious currents, does that represent the unconscious, or does it represent faith, or maybe both? I'm not sure. It's kind of up to the reader to interpret that. Also, the solitude of the island itself feels really in contrast to the sort of the communal life of the extended family of the Megromuts, and I think that's really cool. Solitude is a recurring theme throughout the book. There's a quote here that I just love about solitude. It says, "No two times of solitude are alike, for we are never alone in the same way. There are some singular people whose passage inspires in us a deeper, vaster sense of isolation once they have left us alone." I love that. No two times of solitude are alike, because we're never alone exactly the same way twice. I think that's so cool, and I think I'll close the chat with that. Beautiful thought. This book was really incredible. It's a dreamy, poetic, sort of mythic, gothic mystery in a way, uncovering what happens to this young man on the island as he decides or completes the tasks necessary in order to inherit the island or not. And I won't give that part away. But anyway, I enjoyed reading this so much. My next chat, however, I'm switching gears, and I am reading Book 4 of the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov. I have finished this already, and I will have a chat on it coming up soon. So until next time, take care.